Welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe that our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. We also want to thank our sponsor, Dordt University. Dordt University's 100% online master's programs equip educators to teach Christianly no matter the setting. Programs include a Master of Education, Master of Special Education, and Master of Arts in Teaching. Find out more and get 50% off your first course when you visit teachfortheheart.com/Dordt. That's teachfortheheart.com/DORDT. Today, I'm so excited to have Shannon McLeod with us to talk about taking learning outdoors and what exactly that can look like and how to do it, even if you're in an area that experiences a lot of winter. So Shannon, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So before we get going, would you mind sharing with people a little bit about your background as a teacher?
So I'm a teacher from Saskatchewan in Canada. That's one of the prairie provinces, so just north of North Dakota and Montana. We experience some serious winter here. For most of my career, with the exception of doing my internship in Costa Rica, I've taught in Saskatchewan, and I've taught mostly in rural schools. So schools that are sort of a little bit more remote and a little bit more away from an urban setting. However, starting this year, I'll be working at a nature-based school within the city. So I'm excited about that.
So in this journey, what drew you to taking your classes outdoors?
I think a lot of it had to do with in my own personal life. I gravitated towards outdoor activities. One of my core memories that I have, sort of one of my earliest memories, was when I was about 5 years old, I bought my own tent. My family was into camping, but they camped in a trailer. And to my 5-year-old self, that wasn't camping. We needed to have a tent. So I saved up birthday money, kind of like change that I found along the way. And I have no idea how much money I actually saved up, but I was going to buy that tent. So when I thought I had enough money, I went to my parents. I said, "Can I buy a tent?" And they said, "Okay." And so we went and picked out a teeny tiny little tent. We actually still have it in my parents' basement right now. And on the weekend, we went camping and I saw a tent that was just like it. And so it kind of brought back some memories. So even at a young age, I really, really gravitated towards sort of outdoor activities and being adventurous. As an adult, our family loves to go camping. We go hiking and kayaking in the summer. And in the winter, we like to ski, snowshoe, and hike. And we kind of like find the outdoors sort of like really calming and inspiring. Oftentimes I find that when we go on camping trips, I'll come back with new ideas or new things that I want to try. So I find it really inspiring. However, it took me a long time to sort of connect that personal love with my career. I felt like in university, occasionally professors would bring up the like sort of idea of going outside, but they didn't talk about what to do or how to do it. So it was just kind of like this idea that was in the back of my head, but I didn't know really what to do with it. And in my first few years of teaching, I really would just take kids outside for things like phys ed classes, or we might have like some free time to play outside as a special treat. But it really wasn't a regular part of my teaching practice yet. It wasn't until after a few years of starting teaching at the school that I was just at, where I started to sort of get into the flow of teaching, where I started to notice that even though I was kind of getting the hang of teaching, I still was struggling to make it through the day. By the end of the day, I was just feeling overstimulated and almost brain dead. And so I started to kind of wonder, like, if I feel like that, then how do my students feel? So if I'm experiencing these feelings of overstimulation and overwhelm, then I'm sure my 6-year-old students are probably feeling the same thing, being inside all day. So this was probably around 5 or 6 years into teaching. Myself and another teacher were working to build an outdoor classroom at our school. And also I started working on my master's degree in environmental education. as I was doing my master's degree, I was doing a lot of reading about the benefits of being in nature, as well as the like restorative effects of spending time outside. And also like some of the possibilities of taking learning outside were starting to come to me. But I think the thing that stuck out to me most was over and over again, I read that if we want to create citizens that care about the earth, we need to allow them to make a connection to the earth. And the only way you can do this is really to get kids outside. And so this is kind of like my aha moment. I started with my grade ones, and it was all very experimental at first. And I had a great group of kids who were kind of willing to roll with it. And we started by sort of challenging ourselves to get outside for one class period a day. So it was about 35 minutes a day. We kind of like took a, well, maybe let's try this sort of approach. And the kids really, really started to thrive. We started with simple activities like we would take our reading bags outside, or we take a spelling activity outside. And then once it was done, we just kind of bring everything back in. Eventually, we started to make it longer and sort of a little bit more involved by doing things like nature journals or activities where we moved a little bit further away from the school. After I finished my master's degree, I actually switched positions within the school. And I became a half-time kindergarten teacher. And then the other half-time, I was release time. So my kindergartens, we made a point to get outside every day. But with the release time, I would have kids for either one period or two class periods. So either 35 minutes or an hour and a little bit. And I would have to figure out a way to get them outside and still cover the curriculum. So the first little bit, it was very much, I tried to cover everything. I would take things from all the different curriculums, language arts, art, science, and tried to work them in. However, I was finding it was really challenging to sort of communicate with other teachers what we've already covered and what needed to be covered. And also going year to year, I was finding that was sort of maybe lacking flow. And so I decided to just stick with doing science outdoors. And so I was able to adapt the entire science curriculums for everybody from grade 1 to grade 8 to be used outside. And that's kind of what I went with. We were able to do it even in wintertime. Sometimes it gets a little bit too cold, so it's dangerous to be outside. So we'd always have to have a backup activity ready to go inside. But for the most part, we were able to get outside for at least a little bit. And it was kind of here where I decided that this is kind of like what my jam is. This is what my thing is going to be.
Very cool. So that's really neat, all the things. And I'm excited to kind of dive into a little bit of how you're doing this. So before we get to the how, though, can you share some of the benefits that you've seen in doing learning outside?
Sure. Well, outdoor learning kind of can take a lot of different forms, and the benefits that I see kind of vary depending on how we approach it. So, for example, with my kindergartens, it's a lot more open-ended nature play, whereas with my older grade 8 students, it's much more structured. So depending on sort of where we take it, kind of changes the benefits that you see. However, no matter how you're approaching it, there's still some like general benefits to being outdoors. So I'm kind of going to break them down into like sort of general categories, just to make it a little bit more easy to understand. Physical benefits are kind of what most people would think of when they think of going outdoors for learning. So when we're outside, we're naturally moving more. We probably have to move a little bit further to get to our learning spaces. And that kind of gives kids a lot more freedom to move the way that feels right to them. I have a 3-year-old. And if you want to see how movement feels right to somebody, just watch her in different settings. As soon as she is outside, she just takes off. She wants to run. When she's in the backyard, she wants to be a kitty cat. So there's different ways that feel right, or different ways of moving that feel right to her. However, those ways of moving are not always appropriate in all spaces. So for example, for those kids that just need to run, they tend to get themselves into trouble in the classroom, whereas outdoors, they have more space and freedom to be able to do that. Additionally, since you're probably moving a little bit further to get to your learning space, or maybe even moving between learning spaces outside, kids are also building stamina, and they're also kind of building gross motor skills as they go. The outdoor setting also, it depends on sort of what you have in your space. there's sort of different ways that they can move, either climbing, crawling under things, navigating around things. And those challenge things like your balance, your coordination, build up core strength, things that don't naturally happen in the classroom. Additionally, fine motor skills, which is something that a lot of people don't think of. So picking up tiny objects, sort of having the self-regulation to like delicately pick up a bug. Those are all fine motor skills that happen while we're outside. The big one for me is the mental health benefits. And that was kind of my own reason for going outside. I think if I hadn't discovered outdoor learning, I probably would have experienced some serious teacher burnout and probably wouldn't still be teaching today. For myself, I just needed that mental break from being inside and being in the classroom. I found that the classroom for me could be very overstimulating, especially with a lot of little bodies in it, always moving, always talking. And I started wondering, like, if I feel like this, then I bet you some of my other students are feeling like this. There's also things in the classroom that as adults, we don't necessarily pick up on, but our kids are probably feeling and probably sensing. So things like the glare from a laminated poster, or even like the humming lights, things that I'm able to tune out, but a 6-year-old might not be able to tune out. So being outside gives them a break from that. It's also a very calming setting. And studies have proven that being outdoors actually reduces feelings of stress and anxiety. Like I said, my husband talks about going camping, and as soon as he's in the trees, he just kind of feels like a weight has been lifted from him. And so I noticed that a lot in my students too. And also there's been studies that have shown that once you're outside, when you go back inside, your ability to focus greatly improves. So spending a little bit of time outside can also help kids to really, really sort of come back and be able to focus once they're back in the classroom. This one, the social and emotional benefits, kind of depends on how you approach things. So a lot of times when kids are outside, they naturally sort of work together to accomplish tasks. So like moving a heavy object, you need a friend to help you. Maybe navigating to a new space, or sort of figuring out how we're going to play. That requires a lot more sort of like collaborative play or working together. Also, as a teacher, I find I'm much more able to create activities where kids have to work together, rather than the activities that we create in the classroom that are maybe more like student focused and individual focused. Also, communication skills. That's a huge one that I've noticed, especially with kindergartens. When you're outside, you're giving directions how to find this really cool rock, or you're describing something really, really interesting that you've noticed. Also, because the kids have had these new experiences, telling others about their experiences really, really builds their communication skills, and also helps them to sort of build their vocabulary. The outdoor setting also provides some shared experiences for our students. So because not all of our students come to us with the same experiences, especially students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they generally, and who generally don't have access to those green spaces, they don't necessarily have the same context and vocabulary that some of our more wealthy students have. So being outside allows them to have that shared experience, and allows them to sort of build vocabulary and context together, as well as sort of learn from each other as well. Additionally, things like building resilience, confidence, and understanding of yourself, those come when kids sort of feel proud of those difficult tasks that they've accomplished, things like that. Another huge benefit is you can still cover your curriculum while you're outside. Now, some curriculums are much easier to cover outside than others, I will admit. I've tried to cover a lot of them. However, sometimes you can even cover that curriculum in a more meaningful and memorable way for students. It also provides opportunities for emergent learning. So rather than just presenting a book on something, students can discover something and start to take ownership of that learning themselves. And it also provides ways to sort of meet the needs of all of our learners, especially those that maybe paper and pencil tasks are difficult. And it also, I found, really stretched me as a teacher. It allowed me to be creative and sort of try things that were new and innovative. I've always been a little bit more experimental in my approach, and I'm very open with my students that if something doesn't work, that's okay. We just learn from it and we try again or try it differently. And I think probably the most important benefit of outdoor learning is the connection that students start to build with nature. So as students start to spend time in nature, they start sort of noticing things, observing things, and they start to recognize sort of the cycles and changes that occur in their learning space. So yeah, those are sort of the big ideas, or big benefits to outdoor learning.
Yeah, wow, so many things to think about there, and I know the one that resonated the most with me is just that calming aspect of being outside and in nature. And I know I've experienced that. And if you guys think about it, probably everyone has experienced that idea of just being out, whatever that looks like, just going for a walk outside, going, for a hike in the woods, and just the restorative. I think God we're out in his creation, that restorative nature of just being in his space can be so, so helpful.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. The Herzog Foundation is hosting quite a few teacher events this fall. These training retreats are best-in-class transformational learning experiences designed to sustain growth in Christian education. Upcoming events include the Answers in Genesis Teacher Retreat, the Museum of the Bible Teacher Retreat, and the Athletics, Arts, and Co-Curricular Retreat. Visit teachfortheheart.com/Herzog Retreats to learn more. Now, back to our program.
So when we think about the practical side of it, I would imagine we could spend hours talking about that, because it's going to look different for different people, right? I mean, if you're like, if you're a specials teacher, it's going to look different than if you're an elementary teacher, than if you're a high school teacher. But I hope that for those listening, the first thing that this is doing is just thinking like, could I take my class outside? There's some things that you might say, oh yeah, I could totally do that outside. I know when I was teaching, I taught middle school math, and it was, we had to get through our curriculum. But one simple thing I did was, especially when it started getting nice in the spring, and I was like, I want to be outside. I'm sure they want to be outside. There were certain days where it's like, we're practicing. We can practice just as good outside as inside. Yeah, we don't need to be in the classroom for that. So there's obviously things like that it's like, oh, I can just do this. There's a pavilion outside. We can go out there. So what advice do you have? Obviously, those are some easy ways to do it, but it sounds like you also have some things you're doing that are a little bit more complicated and a little more, not say complicated, but not just, we're doing a worksheet outside, which can have its own benefits. So yeah, what advice do you have? What recommendations do you have for teachers that are interested in doing this?
Well, I think it all kind of like starts with your mindset. So a lot of people say that they can't take their kids outside because they're not outdoorsy, or because they see the outdoors as maybe a space that's not safe. However, I created my website, Thrive with Outdoor Learning, to sort of encourage everybody, even if you don't consider yourself to be an outdoorsy teacher, you can still take learning outside. You don't need to know everything about your learning space. I'm really bad at remembering the names of plants and animals. So half the time kids ask me what something is, and I'm like, I don't know. Let's learn together. Let's figure it out together. And it might be the same thing, like 3 days in a row, they'll ask me the same thing and I still don't remember it. So even as somebody who's been outside with their students a lot, I still don't know all the plants, all the animals in our learning space. However, not knowing everything shows to your students that you don't need an expert to be an expert to get outside, and you don't need to know all those plants and animals. Eventually, you might get to know them, but you don't need to know their names to enjoy them. I think another big thing is to start small, especially if your students aren't used to outdoor learning. So outdoor learning is going to be new for both you and for your students. Your students might only be used to being outside to play. So it's going to take a while for them to shift that mindset, and to be able to differentiate the two sort of ways that you can be outside. So it might just be starting with 10 minutes, and you might even just be staying 10 minutes after recess, and we're going to do a quick 10-minute activity and then go inside. I find it helpful to sort of build that 10 minutes into routine, and then you can sort of build on it. Also, to schedule it in. So once you start to schedule in that time, it signals to your admin that this is important and this is something that's happening all the time. Also to your students, because they might think it's like a one-off sort of thing. And then as the weather changes, they don't come prepared because they thought, oh, we only did it once. We're not going to be outdoor learning today. But if it's on the schedule every day, then students know, families know, your admin knows that outdoor learning time is something that you are going to be doing all the time. I found one of the biggest challenges I had was managing pull-out time with outdoor learning time, because that's often done by like a specialist. And so trying to find that time and trying to sort of like negotiate a balance between the two is often quite challenging. Also, sort of just stick to one focus. I found that at the start, I wanted to try and do everything outside, and it was just hard to manage. Kids got confused. We maybe didn't have all the stuff we needed for the activities, and it just kind of became chaotic. But if we stick to like a single focus, like today we're going to read our story outside, it often makes things easier. A couple of big things to always sort of have like safety in mind, especially if you're going to a new space, and to sort of be prepared ahead of time. So have all the stuff you need for outside ready to go. I've had many times where having to go back inside to get something I've forgotten has kind of like thrown off a lesson, or having to send a student inside and they can't find what they're supposed to find. It's kind of thrown off the flow of things and made it a little bit more challenging. So make sure that you're prepared and always have that sort of like safety aspect in mind. And another big one is to kind of know your students in your community. There might be students in your community who will need some help with accessing proper clothing. So having a way that everybody's able to access proper clothing in a way that sort of like maintains their dignity can be something that you might need to sort of think about. Also, do you have students that maybe have some accessibility needs, and sort of managing the spaces you go to in terms of that. And you might have to do a little bit of parent education as well. And so thinking about how we're going to prepare our students for maybe the cold weather that's coming up, or if you're in a hotter climate, the hot weather coming up. And I think a final tip is to not just do activities that commodify nature. I found at the start I was often just doing activities where we took something from nature and turned it into something. So that kind of gives kids the idea that nature is something that we take and we use. And then I started shifting more to activities where we're observing, or we're taking things that they are abundant and there's a lot of and are maybe already on the ground. We're not just taking things off the tree. So sort of having those ideas in mind. And I think maybe just keeping things simple. Don't overcomplicate it. It doesn't need to be really, really challenging.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these ideas. And there's just really a lot to think about, and hopefully just getting ideas of, you going outside. I guess one final question would be, what about, how do you handle weather? It sounds like you just kind of try to go through all weather unless it's truly prohibitive. Because I do think a lot of us, it's like, well, if it's not, whatever your region considers nice, it's different. Those in the north are like used to colder and vice versa. But is your recommendation kind of like just get out there even when it's a little more colder than you might be comfortable, even when a little hotter than you might be comfortable? Or do you just stick with the nice days?
For myself, because we're up until this point, I was in a rural area, and we were actually in an area that didn't have a lot of protection. So I kind of had set some limits. So like certain temperatures where it was too cold, we stay inside. Or if it's too windy, because it can get quite windy, especially with no protection. And it also just makes it really hard when it's too windy. I can't get students' attention if there's an emergency, that sort of thing. So if it's too windy, too cold, we would stay inside. Rain was not generally a problem. We would go outside in the rain, but kind of having those like set boundaries and having them written down so that I didn't have to like make a sort of choice on the spot. So if I read the temperature and it was colder than -25, then we would stay inside, sort of thing. That's Celsius. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit. So.
But you would be outside in below freezing.
Oh yeah.
Just not. But you would ever.
We're outside pretty
benchmark.
much all year, except if it's too dangerous to be outside.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing a little bit. Can you let people know if they want to, I feel like this is a little bit of an introduction, right? A little bit of a teaser, kind of getting people's interest. If they are like, I'm really interested in this, I'd like to do more. Where can they connect with you and learn more about how to take their classroom outside on a somewhat regular basis?
Well, you can find me on the website, thrivewithoutdoorlearning.com. That's all one word. Or you can email me at thrivewithoutdoorlearning@gmail.com. I currently don't have any social media, and that's kind of intentional right now. But probably the easiest way to get in contact with me is just to send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shannon, so much for being here. We appreciate your sharing with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Shannon and that it's inspiring you to think a little bit more about taking your classroom outside. As I think about this, I am just thankful for God, our Creator, and for the creation that He has given us. He's created this world with so much beauty, so much intricacy, so much variety in the animals and the plants and the weather and all the different things that we experience in nature. And He's given it to us to steward and also to enjoy with Him. So the possibility of getting outside and enjoying nature, enjoying God's creation with Him, even during the school day, is really, really exciting. And I hope it's something that you're able to take advantage of at some point in this year. If you'd like the notes and links from this episode, you can find them at teachfortheheart.com/321. And before we go, I definitely want to invite you to join us at the Rise Up Summit, our free online conference for Christian educators, where we are going to equip and encourage you in your calling to reach students. I hope you can join us. It's going to be completely free the weekend. It's the third weekend in October. I hope that you can join us, and we would really love to see you there. You can get all the details and sign up for free at riseupchristianeducators.com. Well, this episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.